Hi, I'm Rob Vischer. Alisa Childers is the daughter of Chuck Girard, one of the founding members of the Christian band Love Song from the Jesus movement. She grew up in California and became famous in the early 2000s as part of the Christian pop group Zoe Girl. After the band ended, Alisa joined a new church.
After we were attending there for about 8 months, the pastor kind of singled me out. He said, I want you to join this small study group that I have going. And so I went to the first class and was very curious and very excited because I always wanted to dig deeper into my faith. Also because he had compared it to seminary. He said, you go through this 4-year class, you're going to get a seminary level education. And I thought, I want that. I want to dig deeper. I want to be able to give these reasons. And so in the first class, he basically admitted to the class that he was an agnostic. And he called himself a hopeful agnostic.
Alisa was blindsided.
I went through a time of really intense doubt and some deconstruction of my faith. You know, I went from being just about the most sincere Christian you could imagine, loving Jesus with all my heart, loving the Bible, to as an adult, really, for the first time, experiencing really significant intellectual doubts about what I believed. And so I just cried out to God, you know, if you exist, and this was kind of after some deconstruction, if you exist, God, you've got to send me somebody who can talk to me about these things, because I didn't want to abandon it unless I had investigated the other side of things. So I'd heard all these skeptical arguments, and I just wanted to know what the other side was saying and kind of make my decision from there. So God used apologetics to help rebuild my faith.
Before we get too far into her story, Alisa's going to take us back to how she grew up.
When I think back over the course of my life, I think that it is really astounding the way God has worked in my life and just even the way he made me. So I grew up and I was very artistic. I was actually very athletic too. I loved gymnastics and I was a cheerleader in high school and played competitive softball. But really it was the artistic stuff, the music side of things that was the most way I really felt like I connected with God. So I think I had, and I don't say this in a negative way, but I had a very emotional faith in God. I really loved connecting with the Lord. I loved worship services, any kind of time when I would sense that I felt his presence. And I really didn't doubt intellectually what I believed for a good bit of my life, especially when I was younger. I didn't really doubt or question whether or not Jesus really was raised from the dead or if the Bible was his word. And so that would actually happen later as I was an adult. And I share this story quite a bit, that my faith was challenged within the context of a church that would end up rebranding itself as a progressive Christian community. And the pastor of that church was really intellectual. So he would bring all these intellectual arguments essentially against a lot of the things that I had believed my whole life. And if I really think about the pillars of my worldview, it was my experience or my feelings, which were good. I don't look down on that, but also just my pre-commitment to the idea that the Bible was God's word. And he was really able to knock the legs out of both of those. And it propelled me into a faith crisis that was indescribable. But the main point of this story is how God used things like apologetics and intellectual pursuits to rebuild my faith. And I hope that I can come up with the words to describe how even emotionally satisfying that was on that journey. I remember crying out to God one night when I was in my rocking chair with one of my babies, and I was just like, God, if you're real, if the things that I've believed all my life about you are true, I need you to show up. But I didn't need him to show up with an experience because I had a lot of experience. I had no problem feeling, what I associated as the presence of God my whole life. I needed information. I needed to know that there was somebody out there that knew about these things and could present information that would give me both sides of the arguments. And then I would be able to compare those things to one another. So ultimately, God answered that by leading me to study all sorts of different things under the banner of Christian apologetics, like history, philosophy, biblical scholarship, you name it. I just read and listened to whatever I could get my hands on. And the cool thing about this, and the way that God weaved this back into my life, is even after I had an apologetics podcast, I had a public ministry in apologetics, my family went through a really great tragedy about 5 years ago. And that was when my nephew passed away very suddenly. It was an unintentional drug overdose. And it was, at that time, and probably still since, the most rattling and almost like faith challenging thing I've ever been through, even worse than the faith crisis, which up till that time was the darkest thing that I had ever been through, because even in my faith crisis, just wondering if God even really existed at all, when that was my entire world, like that was pretty dark. But when I went through this thing with my nephew passing away, he was just our beloved Matthew. We just loved him. He was the only, at that time, my son and Matthew were the only two boys in the whole family. And when Matthew died very suddenly, I remember feeling like there was nothing good in the world. Like my emotions, my feelings were saying, it's like there's no hope. There's no goodness in the world. There's no God. It's all just darkness. And I remember thinking back over the intellectual study that I had done up to that point, and I think that is maybe when it was put to the test more than any other time in my life, because what I had to do in that moment was I had to say, okay, this is what my feelings are saying. This is what feels very real. But because of what I know, because I have investigated the claims of Christianity, I know that they're true whether I feel God's presence right now or not. I know that Jesus is who he said he is, that the Bible is his word, that he can be trusted, that the historic claims of Christianity are true, whether I'm feeling that right now or not. And so what I did in that moment was I chose to stand on what I knew was true. And the cool thing about how good God is and how merciful he is that over the subsequent days and weeks and even months and years, his goodness and faithfulness was felt, even maybe more strongly than before. But in that moment, I didn't feel anything at all. And so I'm so thankful for how God has orchestrated the different phases of my life, even weaving music back in, because over the course of maybe 10 years, from the time my faith was in crisis till it was rebuilt, and even till the time of Matthew's death, I was writing music. That was kind of my outlet. It still is. It will always be my outlet to go sit down at the piano when things feel overwhelming, when they feel really dark, and write a few songs. And then the Lord provided an opportunity about 3 years ago to record those songs. And looking back at the music I wrote before my faith crisis and before all my study, and then the music that I wrote after that, I can really see an added layer of depth, of theological understanding. And so as hard as all of those seasons have been, I'm so thankful to God in his sovereignty for walking me through them, because I think I, especially as a very emotional and feelings-based person, needed to know what it feels like for you to not be able to rely on your feelings, and for your feelings to just go dark, and know that you have to stand on what's true. And so that has been a very stabilizing force in my life. It's been actually intellectual study.
Alisa has obviously investigated the claims of Christianity. If you're investigating or just want to strengthen your faith, go to find Alisa's podcast, the Alisa Childers podcast. It's a helpful resource to dive deeper into questions, doubts, and Jesus. Alisa was raised by contemporary Christian music royalty, so it was easy for her to believe in Jesus as a child. But in our next story, KB wasn't raised in the type of home that made it easy to believe.
I am from Southside St. Petersburg. I was born there. I didn't spend a lot of time that I remember in St. Pete as a kid, but I do remember my mother marrying a gentleman who she was married to for 2 years. He was abusive to my mother that ended up turning into a divorce. There was a split. My mother really believed that I needed to have a father figure in my life. So my mother remarried, and she married a military man. He was, for all intents and purposes, a good dude. He was a good father. I did not feel taken advantage of by him. I felt protected by him. He served in the Air Force. We moved from St. Pete to Southern Illinois. I spent a good chunk of my childhood on Scott Air Force Base, right outside of East St. Louis. When I was a young man on Scott Air Force Base, I was riding my bike home from the pool. A car came out of nowhere and hit me, and I had my helmet on, but it wasn't strapped. And I remember distinctly that helmet would fall off my head all the time because I never strapped it. Somehow I was able to flip over my bike, my head go through their windshield, my back land squarely on the hood, go flying off of their car, bouncing on the ground, scraping up my back, and the helmet stayed on the whole time. And by God's grace, the helmet saved my life or saved me from being paralyzed. Simultaneously, when I got to the hospital, the doctors were looking at me wondering how I was walking because a boy, he had to be the same age as I, or close to the same age that I was, on the other side of the base, was also being rushed to the hospital, who was also hit by a car, but he looked like he wasn't going to make it. So the doctors thought that I was the other boy, but it seems like I was spared. I knew that God was preserving me. Even before I knew him, I didn't know his heart, but I knew his hand. I put it like that. So the time that I lived on base, I did get to see my father, who was a soldier in the military. He taught me about hard work, discipline, chivalry, some aspects of character and integrity. But unfortunately, some of those things that he gave himself to earlier kind of dissipated. It led into my parents' divorce, and my mother and I moved back to St. Pete, smack dab in the middle of the hood. That was a dramatic shift in environment. I went from a structured, safe, I never saw crimes being committed. The worst crime I saw was a high schooler smoking a cigarette, and I remember being shook by that. And I remember one morning walking in the dark to the bus stop, stepping over a bag that had a controlled substance in it. I thought, children should not be growing up like this. I shouldn't be stepping over this. This is not the way things should be. I should not have to be a man at 15 years old and be the one thinking about how I'm going to keep my mother safe in a neighborhood I just got to. That's when I started trying things I never thought I would try, doing things I never thought I would do, trying to feel through the darkness to find some kind of answer in this confusion. There was a drug dealer in my family who was always able to help. If there was a bill that needed to be paid, if there was someone that got in some kind of financial bind with their home or their mortgage, or if someone needed to get freed from some financial chain, and financial chains are heavy, it was the drug dealer in my neighborhood, in my family, that would show up and help us. So I'm thinking, maybe I should be like him. And I thought what it meant is to be willing to hurt somebody, even kill somebody, based off them looking at me wrong. That's one example. The second example is what I thought it meant to be a man was somebody who would pursue as many women as they could and to have as many sexual exploits as they could. So I was, junior in high school, and I heard there was a dude that was in my school that was a rapper. And I saw him one day after class, and I asked him, I said, hey, do you want to battle rap sometime? And he said to me, I don't battle rap, I do Christian rap. And I remember almost like wincing, like, what do you do Christian rap? What is that? But then another emotion came in where I was like, man, this dude just told me without qualification that he was committed to the things of God, and he's not worried about how I looked at him. He's not worried about how I felt about his religious commitment. And I was struck by how he was unashamed. And I saw Jeremy, that was his name, Jeremy Baker. I saw him sometime later outside eating lunch. I walked over to the table, and he had a CD on the table. And the CD had a dude on the front cover that had dreadlocks, red bandana going across his mouth, red bandana going across his forehead. And the title of the album was Bloody Streets Volume 1. And Jeremy told me that it was Christian music, and which was hard for me to believe to some degree. And so I took it home and I listened to it. I loved every single song. It sounded like the music that I liked listening to. He was telling his story of how God had radically saved him and changed him, and how he was essentially, before Jesus, he represented the destination of what I thought manhood was before he came to Jesus. He had money, power, he had respect, he had a harem of women. He, in a lot of ways, embodied all of the toxicity and, unbiblical forms of masculine pursuits, which I thought was the right way. He was everything I wanted to be. But he showed me that on the other side is destruction. In the midst of his pursuits of the flesh was disaster. And long story short, Jesus snatched him up. He went through a radical transformation, and his name in the streets used to be sinister. He was aptly sort of carrying the language of the demonic as a non-believer. The Lord saved him. He dropped the S on his name and turned it to minister, spelt it M-Y-N-I-S-T-A. To this day, he's actually a pastor in Philly right now. To his day, that's who he is. He gave his life to the ministry of the gospel. And on that album, in the last song, he had a gospel presentation. And I believed on Jesus, and that marked the beginning of my journey.
KB is best known by me as the church clap rapper. But he's not only a rapper who surpassed his mentor Minister with hundreds of millions of streams, he's the defender of the faith who loves Jesus. KB grew up with a mom who brought many types of father figures into their home, but in our next story, Jason only has the memory of his mom.
I was 8 years old when my mom passed away, and I have 2 brothers and a sister, and my dad had a really rough childhood and then obviously a tough life as a young adult with losing his wife and having 4 young children. And so he didn't handle it very well and became an alcoholic. Eventually he left the family and we were left to be adopted. And fortunately I was taken in by my aunt and uncle. That's when I first started going to church. I had never really went to church and didn't know about Jesus and read the Bible or anything. And that was like the opportunity where I thought, maybe my mom's in heaven. I want to be a Christian so I can see my mom again. But that's as far as it went. Being a Christian wasn't about me being transformed. It was about me just being a better person because I was going to make different decisions than other people. And so I lived that way 20 plus years. Sally and I got married, started a family, and I realized whenever I started to really think about my life and what was important, I wasn't even sure if God existed. We're told that everything can be explained by science, that there's no need for God. And that's what I was taught in high school, and that's what I was taught in college. And so that led me to decide God didn't exist. Became an atheist after being a supposed Christian for 20 plus years and being a lukewarm churchgoer. Didn't believe God existed.
One of his coworkers got diagnosed with cancer, and I think that made him reevaluate why. Why all the suffering? Why all the pain? There wasn't a significant thing leading up. It was pretty much a snap of your fingers and it was a change. And he didn't share anything with me for a while about what he was going through. He shared it with friends, but with me, he didn't. And I remember just crying and praying on our bedroom floor because I didn't know what was going on.
It was also at the same time, if you remember, about the 21 Christians, I believe, in Egypt that were beheaded on the beach. And they were given the option to denounce Christianity or Jesus, and they didn't. And they were beheaded for it. And so to me, I was like, I can't do that. And so between that and then the problem of evil and suffering, and honestly, me being a lukewarm churchgoer, I sat in church thinking about everything but God. It was more about appearances maybe being better than other people. And so fast forward to 2015, I'm getting to coach one of the best basketball teams in the state of Illinois. I am working a sales job, making more money than I ever could have dreamed about making. Everything was going great. Sally and I had a happy marriage. We were fine. Three boys that were growing and healthy. And so everything seemed to be perfect. And then that's when, in December of 2015, when a friend got sick with cancer, saw the Christians beheaded, it was just like a conscious decision. God doesn't exist, so why am I going through the motions? Why am I faking this? But at the same time, I realized that if God doesn't exist, then nothing really matters. There's no right and wrong. I'm going to be dead in 30 years and nobody's going to care. It doesn't matter if I'm a good husband, a good father, a good neighbor. It doesn't matter.
There were 2 days that stand out in my head that I honestly didn't know if he would be home when I got back. It was a tough time. He was that different of a person. He had no hope.
There is no hope without God in Jesus.
And for me, it was such a struggle because I was a new Christian basically when we met, and he has been the leader in our family. And so that change in him was so drastic. It was devastating to me.
I guess I struggled with how to start that conversation or what to even say.
It was a good 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah. And eventually we did talk, but I was honest. And I decided I was going to at least search for truth. And so I began doing a lot of research and studying science, history, archaeology to figure out, well, what is true? I would spend time reading online or books, and then also listening to podcasts of different philosophers, scientists. But what I learned was we can't be here without something behind all this. You know, when atheist scientists are using words like impossible, miracle, can't explain how or why, that's not what I was taught in high school and college. I was taught they had all the answers, that they could explain it very easily. And I learned that that's not the case. So that kind of opened my mind up. If that's correct, then maybe God does exist. Maybe there is a God there. It was probably a good 3 to 4 months of really doing a lot of research. I was studying anywhere from 10 to 14 to 16 hours a day.
After he disclosed everything and what was going on, I knew what to pray for instead of just crying help. I knew now that I was going to pray for his salvation. To find the answers, he had to take that journey. I didn't know what would lead at the end of the journey, what that was going to look like. But during that time, it was extremely stressful because he was very disconnected from all of us. And we had to give him that space.
After really starting with science and just doing a lot of research and reading and listening, coming to the conclusion that we can't be here without something, then that led me into, do we have any answers? Where can I find some answers? So I did some research on other religions, history and archaeology, and really what happened is I came back full circle and realized that the only thing that makes sense is Christianity, reality. And the problem of evil and suffering, Christianity really gave me answers. But even then, I still wasn't necessarily a believer. The Bible mentions miracles. And part of the reason that I became very skeptical was I hadn't experienced any miracles. And during the time that I was searching, and I was really searching for God, I experienced some things that can't be explained. And one of those was I was listening to a podcast, and I think it was titled The Evidence for God. And I was on my way home from work listening to that, and they were giving different reasons or evidences. And I stopped at a stoplight. This bird lands on the hood of my car and sits directly in front of me, right in front of the steering wheel. I've never had a bird land on my car at any point in time in my life, and I've never been with anybody where that's ever happened. And it just sits there. And I'm like, what in the world is this bird doing? And finally I'm looking at it, I'm like, that looks like a dove. And as I'm listening to this podcast talking about the evidence for God, I get to thinking, why would a bird land on the car? And so I start looking around, and there's no other birds in the sky, in trees, on power lines, on cars. That's the only bird that I can find. I'm turning my head, looking backwards and looking to both sides and looking in front of me, looking up in the trees, and can't find a bird. Right before the light changes, the bird flies off. And I'm thinking that was really weird. And I was thinking a dove is supposed to signify something about God. And so I started to drive off, but I watched the bird, and the bird goes over and lands on a church and sits there. And I know that a lot of people are looking at that. That's just a coincidence, but I don't believe that because I've never experienced that before, haven't experienced it after. At the time when I was like questioning, why don't miracles happen? Where are you, God? Why don't you show up? And maybe he gives us enough to allow us to believe, but also to allow us to not believe if we don't want to. And honestly, I didn't fully believe that until after God changed my heart. And then I was like, thank you, because that was something that I needed. And so after coming to the realization that God has to exist, I realized how wicked a person I was. And so those same people that I was looked down on, for 20 plus years, I realized I was just like them. That's when my heart broke. And that's truly when God showed up. And he changed my heart. And I had love for people that I didn't have before. That's the moment that the color came back in the room. It was literally like a light switch went on, changed my heart, and I could see things that I never saw before. And I had a desire to read the Bible, and it was like verses and words jumped off the page and really had an impact on me. The realization that I needed Jesus to be my Savior was instant.
In this episode, God pursued a woman who grew up in a Christian family and a man who grew up in a broken family. God revealed himself to a man who saw a tragedy from a distance and ran from God. And he revealed himself to a man who saw his fourth son die in his arms. And that makes me say, wow, God. And when I say wow, God, I mean the one true living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the one who makes my heart say,
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
My wow God story.
I wanted to share a wow God moment.
That's my wow God story. Praise God.
And I'm so thankful to God for this wow God moment.
So, thank you, God.